Hi, this is Dr. Peter Grinspoon. Thanks for listening to my YouTube channel. We're going to talk today about the most incredible man I've ever met, my dad, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, who had just an extraordinary life and made phenomenal contributions. Before we get started, feel free to look down on the bottom right of your screen and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free and we have a lot of great content. So again, I'm Dr. Peter Grinspoon and we're talking about the great Dr. Lester Grinspoon. My dad is very well known for his advocacy in cannabis legalization and for the psychiatric use of psychedelics. But there's much, much more to him than that. He was a legendary Harvard professor. How did he get to be a legendary Harvard professor? It was really amazing. He grew up dirt poor in the suburbs of Boston, literally scrounging for an activity. He lost his brother when he was a teenager due to a birth injury. His brother was very, very sick, Martin. And he lost his dad when he was 18 years old. He also later lost his son to leukemia, which we'll talk about. But how did a man was starting out so poor and with so many losses early in life turn out to be the great person that he was? He went on scholarship to Tufts University for college. Then he went on scholarship to Harvard Medical School. What is amazing about this is he never actually got a high school diploma. He never graduated from high school. So he has a medical degree and a college degree, but he actually doesn't have a high school degree. He also quit high school in his late teens to join the Merchant Marine, which is why he never finished high school. My dad has always been interested in social causes and social justice. The first public magazine article he had was in the New Republic when he was talking about nuclear disarmament. Nuclear disarmament was an issue that he was interested in his entire career. He and the famous astronomer Carl Sagan, who was a good friend of his, got arrested together at the Nevada nuclear test site, working for a nuclear test ban, so they stopped blowing up nuclear weapons and contaminating all of us. They succeeded, and there is a comprehensive test ban. So my dad has been interested in all of this stuff. His drug activism started in 1971 when he published a book called Marijuana Reconsidered, a drug and its social evolution. Now, at that point in 1971, only 12% of the U.S. population believed in a legalization of cannabis. So this is pretty bold for my dad to be writing a book. But he wanted to say, before we criminalize all our children, let's take an adult look at marijuana. That was on the cover. This book did really well, and it was reviewed on the front page of the New York Times Book Review, and it was a bestseller. My dad's argument was, cannabis, of course, has its harms, as do any other drugs and medications. You know, he agreed that it might contribute to psychosis, that teenagers shouldn't use it, that pregnant women shouldn't use it, many of the same concerns we have today. But he said it has a wide variety of medical benefits, and it has a very vast history of being used medically and socially among human beings. It's been used for 5,000 to 10,000 years. And he argued vigorously against generally the war on drugs, but specifically the criminalization of cannabis users. Since the time he wrote his book, Marijuana Reconsidered, there have been 20 million arrests for nonviolent cannabis use in the United States. That's absolutely crazy. When you get arrested for anything, but particularly cannabis, it can affect your employment, it can affect your job prospects, it can affect your student loans and your educational opportunities. It causes generational poverty. And the thing that alarmed my dad most was the racial disparity in cannabis arrests. Blacks and whites use cannabis at the same rate, and there were 4 times as many blacks of these 20 million nonviolent, useless cannabis arrests. There were 4 times as many blacks as whites that were arrested. So my dad's advocacy for cannabis legalization was medical. He wanted to do research. It was scientific. He didn't think it was dangerous enough to be a Schedule I drug when it's obviously safer than alcohol and tobacco, but it was also social in trying to stop us from waging this racist, horrible war on drugs. My dad ended up writing throughout his career 180 scientific papers and 11 books. The books were on, 2 were on psychedelics, 1 was on cannabis, 1 was on cocaine, 1 was on amphetamines, and 1 was on schizophrenia, and 1 was on nuclear war. He really had a very broad and deep intellect. His next book about drugs that made a big impact was his 1979 book, Psychedelic Drugs Reconsidered. In that book, he was calling from the rooftops for the reevaluation of psychedelics and for the use of psychedelics in psychiatry to help people with depression and with trauma. In fact, psychiatrists were using, for example, MDMA ecstasy in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. And in 1987, the government was trying to make MDMA illegal, ecstasy, because it was a quote unquote party drug. But the psychiatrists were all up in arms because it was really helping them with therapy, psychotherapy, helping people with trauma, and even helping couples with marital problems, helping people get through them. So my dad sued the government in 1987. There's this lawsuit, Grinspoon versus DEA. And I think he managed to get MDMA rescheduled for one day, but then the government found a way to put it in Schedule 1, which means no medical use, which is nonsense, and high abuse liability. There's some abuse liability. MDMA has been stuck in Schedule 1 to the current date. There's been a lot of recent interest and recent efforts to get it out of Schedule 1 because it's obviously a very valuable medicinal compound that we need to study. But it's interesting, when my dad wrote his book in 1979, Psychedelic Drugs Reconsidered, about 90% of the psychiatric community was against psychedelics. They were just all sheep-like following the war on drugs. And, when my dad met his new division chief, Dr. Joseph Coyle, at a combined staff meeting at the psychiatric department at Harvard, having never met this guy in front of all the other combined psychiatrists, the director said, "Dr. Grinspoon, I've read your book on psychedelics and I don't like it one bit." And my dad never got promoted at Harvard to full professor, again, despite credentials off the scale, because of his work on psychedelics and because of his work on cannabis. Now, of course, 90% of psychiatrists are in favor of the use of psychedelics in psychiatry, and most hospitals, including my hospital, Mass General Hospital, has a center for the study of psychedelics. Did they ever airbrush my dad back into the picture for calling for this, 40 years ago? Or did they ever apologize to him? Or did they ever actually give him the promotion he deserved? None of that happened, but we're very happy, and this is largely due to my dad's work. The psychedelics are coming out of the shadow. There was a big article in the Harvard student magazine, the Harvard Crimson, called Grinspoon Reconsidered, where they just lambasted Harvard University for penalizing my dad on working on these social issues, especially since the criminalization of minorities for drug use has really come into the spotlight now. And they nodded to how prescient my dad was, and they just said, Harvard needs to evaluate promotions based on the quality of the academic work, not on whether they buck the societal winds at the time, because societal winds change. All of this, of course, made for a very interesting childhood for me. We had people in my living room like the Carl Sagans, all the cannabis activists, people like Allen Ginsberg, and they were all passing the peace pipe and having the most intense, mind-blowing, inspiring conversations about drug policy, drug law, cannabis, psychedelics, nuclear disarmament, the state of social justice around the world. And I really came to see cannabis as more a social and intellectual lubricant than an evil drug of abuse. Now, of course, this caused great confusion when I went to the DARE meetings in my junior high school, and they talked about how cannabis was a satanic lettuce and how if you took one puff, your legs would fall off. I had that message balancing with the other message I had at home with these tremendous academics, intellectuals using cannabis to expand their minds and to further their discussion. So, I was ingrained basically with a deep distrust of authority and rebelliousness from an early age. But all of this to say, my dad passed away about 4 years ago. We had a wonderful intellectual symposium on all of his accomplishments called Grinspoon, called Lesterfest. This was just all these great luminaries in the drug world, like Dr. Carl Hart, Dr. Ethan Nadelman. They all came to UMass, where they have my dad's papers. And we just had this wonderful discussion of my dad and his phenomenal contributions. It would take hours to go over all of his contributions. But the fact is, when I was a little kid, I saw my dad and Carl Sagan and the others thinking they could change the world. And that's such a powerful message for our children. And I got that message from an early on, and it inspired me so much. And my dad actually, over the decades, did in fact change the world. For example, when he wrote his book, Marijuana Reconsidered, 12% of adults supported legalizing marijuana. Now, the number, it went up about a point for each of the 50 years my dad worked on it. And now about 70% of people support the recreational legalization of marijuana. About 94% of Americans support the legal access to medical marijuana. And a lot of this has to do with my dad's 1993 book, Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine, which destigmatized cannabis for patients and for doctors alike. So anyways, this is Dr. Peter Grinspoon. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. We're talking about the great adventures of my dad, Dr. Lester Grinspoon.